Dr. Nasr, thank you for accepting our invitation for interview.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Aslan, you're a very old friend of mine, and anytime you ask anything of me, I'll be very glad to do if I can. I'm very pleased to be able to see you again and to talk to you for a few minutes.
Thank you. So my first question is going to be about intellectual impoverishment of Muslim world. In Muslim world, we will see many scholars, many intellectuals, even Sufi masters, but not many philosophers. You are the only living Muslim philosopher. That is true, Dr. Nasr. And how do you explain this?
Yes, this can be explained fairly clearly. First of all, it is not as bad as usual scholarship makes it. That everything ended in the 12th century with Ibn Rushd, with Averroes. After that, the Muslims didn't have any philosopher. That's not at all true. For 50 years, I've been writing about later Islamic philosophy. And in your own country, Turkey, there are a number of very, very interesting philosophers of the 17th, 18th, 19th century.
Yes, I mean contemporary.
No, just a moment. We had this in the Arab world, unfortunately, except for Iraq, which was close to Iran, the philosophical tradition went down and practically disappeared, not completely, but practically. And so we had a situation in which when modernism came, there was very little really living Islamic philosophical tradition, except in Iran, to respond even to it.
That's true.
To respond to it. And most people turned either to a kind of Salafi understanding, going back to simple understanding of Kalam, and some people to Sufism, but not in its intellectual aspect, in its more emotional and practical aspect.
Yes.
And so a kind of vacuum was created, which, however, during the last few years, in fact, is being somewhat filled up. I myself, in my humble way, have trained 30, 40 people since I'm in exile in America. In Islamic thought and philosophy and intellectual Sufism and so forth are all professors now, and they're changing the scene here gradually. It will change. But it will take some time. And the opposition of Wahhabism and this kind of thinking,
yes,
to think is really anathema for the Islamic world.
That's true.
If oil had not been discovered in the deserts of Arabia, there would be a lot more intellectual activity in the Islamic world today.
Why do you see such a relations?
Because oil permitted the Saudi government to try to spread Wahhabism, which is highly anti-philosophical, anti-intellectual.
That's true, yeah.
That's why I'm joking.
I see.
Yes.
I see. Okay, so how about the education, modern education in Islamic world, which is...
That actually is precisely the problem, because the people we have in society are people who 10 years ago, 20 years ago were students in some places, and now they're doing various activities in various Islamic countries. The madrasa system continued in some places.
Yes.
And except again for Iran and one or two places in Afghanistan and Pakistan, the al-ulum al-aqliya was not taught very much.
Yes.
Al-ulum al-naqliya was taught.
Yes.
So the madrasas produced mullahs who knew fiqh and alhamdulillah knew some Quran and hadith and so forth, but not the intellectual aspect of Islamic madrasas which existed in 500 years before them. That part was either shortened or forgotten, unfortunately. So anyway, they produced people who could not respond actually to the problems that the modern world posed for the Islamic world. So Islamic governments tried to create the schools to try to be modern, to try to answer these questions. All of them don't have bad intention, but they thought that education was the key. But what education? Instead of continuing our own traditional educational system, but expanding it, adding to it, and so forth and so on, but the roots in Islamic subjects, they kept copying Western models.
Yes.
One country like Iran copying France, Indo-Pakistan, England, your country, Turkey, both Germany and France, and so forth and so on. I will not go into details. So we created in our own hands an educational system which is not an educational system to train Muslims for Muslim Islamic society. It's a second-rate Western educational system.
Unfortunately.
Unfortunately. And this is a disease all over except countries that were so far away like Mauritania. They didn't have any universities.
Yes.
I mean, but all the way from Morocco to Malaysia and every land in between, the same phenomenon.
Yes.
The same phenomenon. But again here, there are some signs of hope. As you know, besides being a humble scholar, I'm also an educator. I'm a dean and president of university in Iran, and I've had very high administrative positions and was able to exert influence in determining curricula and so forth. I try to bring back Islamic subjects, especially to the humanities.
Yes.
To do it with physics should be done also. That's a bit more difficult. At least into the humanities. So our students in the humanities and law and social science and so forth would learn everything on the basis of their own tradition. In Tehran University, and had some influence in other universities. When I went to Ari Mer University, the Royal University of Iran, where I was president, the first thing I did was to create a department of the philosophy of science.
Yes.
But our philosophy of science.
Excellent.
Not just what positivism was saying in London or New York. And that has fortunately flowered and produced some very, very good people. Now they have a PhD program. They wrote to me. We start with MA. Alhamdulillah, it's good. There are some good signs. And there are now in Malaysia and Indonesia and places like that a great deal of awareness of this. But what you have is, again, the administration, the governments, these lazy people have been used to all of this emulation. They don't want to think, they have no creativity, and they drag things along. That's the whole trouble.
Yes.
In the same way that some strong leader comes to the country and he forces people to build roads and asphalt them, and so within 2 years all the roads are asphalted. We need some strong leader who's so much interested in education that he will press for that, in the same way he would press for economic problems or military social powers. So to press for that, to try to put the energy of the country, not only to modernize education, because the modern world has lost itself. What education philosophy? We have all kinds of contending, conflicting education philosophies right here in Washington or America, where we sit, or even Europe. There's not one model that you can even follow. But to revive our own very strong ta'lim wa tarbiyah, our whole tradition of education, which is always combined with also education of the soul, of akhlaq, of ethics, which we need so much. In the Islamic world, even our ulama, turbaned ulama, they learn Arabic, they learn fiqh, they learn hadith, and so on and so on. They don't learn ethics. Ethics is not taught. If they're ethical and good people, alhamdulillah, but many of them, the knowledge of Islam itself is not associated with their actions as ethical people.
Of course.
No, it should not be, of course. I mean, they should always go together.
Yes. My second question, Dr. Nasr, is about traditional school. You are one of the leading members of the traditional school. It's called Perennial Philosophy. And one of the important projects of the traditional school is to re-sacralization of the culture or rediscovery of the tradition as they understood. But from here we see that, I see at least, it is not so much success, Professor Nasr. Why do you think so?
Well, again, this was not the 24-hour project.
I
You
see.
compare now with 70 years ago, 50 years ago. There is much success. The understanding of other religions in the West, in a deeper sense, is much more widespread now than there was then. Not that everybody understands.
That is the impact of the traditional school. Is it because of the impact of the traditional school?
To a large extent.
I see.
Not only, I'm not saying claiming everything for ourselves, but that's the most important. Criticism of modern philosophy,
Yes.
which is in a crisis. The deepest criticism has come from the traditional school. And what they have revived, which are traditional philosophies of various traditions.
Yes.
And the fact that there's more interest today, even among philosophers, whether more Muslims, agnostic or atheist, and so forth and so on, but there are a number of them in the revival of philosophy in non-Western philosophies, is because of the tradition of the traditional philosophy or the perennial philosophical school. So I'm not as helpless as hopeless as you seem to sound. In fact, there is, but this is not a short-term project. It's going to take some time.
But in academia, it is not received very well. Academia
yes
doesn't know.
Yes and no. It's better received in America than in Europe.
I see.
The academia in Europe is much more closed intellectually than here. But here, I've had no trouble with a single of my students who've done an MA or a PhD with me in finding a university job. They're all professors now.
Excellent.
You know, I have a former student of mine of Egyptian origin who was brought up in this country, was professor at Xavier University, which is a Catholic university. And he's all the time defending Catholicism against modern deviations. And the professor said, "You're the most Catholic professor." This is the only Muslim. He's a very good Muslim, very devout Muslim. But we play that role, yes. Because also the crisis that Catholicism and Protestantism have is weakening this dilution that you see, this surrendering all the time. And the fact that we don't surrender to every error that comes out of the closet or into the room, and we try to stand up to the defend the truth, is the support for many people who are not strictly speaking either Muslims or traditionalists in that strict sense, but they're influenced by it. I look at the number of books, the number of articles that come out. If you see them as...
How about the Muslim world, Professor Nasr?
Pardon me?
Muslim world.
The Muslim world, you should know better than I, but anyway, of course, I've been in exile for about 4 years from Iran, but I traveled very regularly for 25 years. I went every year to Egypt, and now that Sisi and these people come to power, and I don't want to go. And anyway, I'm too old to travel long distance. I used to come to your country, Turkey, every year.
Yes.
I've met you there. I come very often. There are certain Islamic countries, including Turkey and Iran, which in fact produce the most number of books and translations, much more than the Arab world.
That's
And
true.
are intellectually much more active,
Yes.
in which there are many, many interesting trends that are going on. Of course, there's some unfortunate things. What happened to the Gulen movement and the fighting against the government and squandering of so much energy of the Turkish people, both intellectually and financially and so forth. Yes, those things are there, but nevertheless, there's an intellectual alertness, awakenness in Turkey and Iran, which is stronger than in the Arab world, but it's not totally absent in the Arab world. And interest in our perspective grows more and more. I've had, in the 1960s, when I was teaching at the American University of Beirut for 1 year, 3 or 4 of my books were translated into Arabic. Then they all went out of print for years. There was only one book translated in Oman, the Young Muslims Guide. Just the last 2 or 3 years, 7 books have been translated and published in Cairo, in Arabic.
Thank you. Thank you.
In Arabic.
That's
and of course, in your country,
all of your books.
Not all of it, but 25 volumes of my works exist in Turkish. They have this new edition with İnsan Yayınları, beautifully done, and Also, my works are very, very widely received in Pakistan and subcontinent of India.
Yes.
And in every country where you have these unfortunate episodes going on, you also have a core gradually growing.
Yes.
People who are devout Muslims, intellectually alert, open to the challenges of the West, and know the West well, which we need. We need Occidentalists really, like the West developed Orientalists, I've always said.
Yes.
And that is to some extent going on. But there's a lot of impediment.
That's true.
Both from the outside, of course, the West doesn't want that. So the countries which are under Western influence, they try to diminish this. And also a lot of people within the Islamic world who are ruling in the various autocratic ways.
Yes.
They're afraid of some of these people, what they say. All of these are true. But
Yes.
nevertheless, the situation now, let's say compared to 50 years ago, is much better as far as this is concerned.
Thank you. My third question is going to about Islamic modernism. So, Muhammad Iqbal wrote his book Reconstruction of Religious Thought in Islam in 1934, long time ago. So, considering that through reconstruction of the Muslim mentality, they will reconstruct all Muslim world, revive the Muslim world. But it didn't work in that way. Why?
Well, first of all, because Iqbal himself, I have respect for him as a good poet, especially the Persian language. I don't have much respect for his philosophy. He was too much influenced by Western philosophy, not no Islamic philosophy at all, although he wrote the development of metaphysics in Persia, all based on Western sources.
Yes.
He says nothing about later Islamic philosophy, all the great figures of Mullah Sadr and stuff, we didn't even know about them. But anyway, he looked upon the situation from the point of view, really, of a person trained in Britain with a kind of British outlook on the Islam, besides, of course, being Muslim, an important Islamic thinker, trying to get independence of India. And he did not have the knowledge, really. Did not have the knowledge to get deeply into some of the issues that are involved. When the Oxford Center of Islamic Studies was inaugurated about 15 years ago, they asked me to inaugurate it. And I gave 4 lectures called The Revival of Islamic Thought, an answer to Iqbal. They're in the drawer in the other room. I haven't published them. So many things to do. But
You need to publish.
One day I hope, inshallah, to bring
Inshallah,
it out. Inshallah. But it's a very important issue.
Very important, yes.
And the great disappointment in Pakistan, many people are my very good friends, I have a lot of associate friends, is that they put Iqbal on the pedestal.
I see.
Like you put Ataturk on a pedestal in Turkey. Ataturk was a great man, he did a lot. But also, is the whole of Turkey for the next 1,000 years cannot just be based on what Ataturk said in 1924, obviously. In Pakistan, I said jokingly, if you look at it, everything you can imagine about Iqbal has been written.
Yes.
Iqbal on how to make good kebab. And, you know, anything you can imagine is that Iqbal and they don't go beyond it. I said, all right, you consider Iqbal a very important figure in your history, but time passes by, and you need to face various issues. And Iqbal, in certain things, did not have deep enough knowledge to do what he wanted to do.
But how about the general Islamic modernism, which they try to integrate Islam within the modern project?
What I'm saying is that since Iqbal, modernism itself is dying.
I see.
There was no postmodernism at the time of Iqbal,
Yes.
and not postmodernism.
Yes.
And all the relativism, the Derrida, people like that, are brought about the whole philosophical enterprise. And of course, they were all before the time of Iqbal.
Yes.
And those are now the great challenges to the Islamic world.
I see.
Logical positivism. Iqbal did not have to face that.
Yes.
We have to face it.
Yes.
And so we need to continue what Iqbal suggested. Iqbal said imitation is the worst thing.
Yes.
Once I gave a lecture to 4,000 people in Pakistan on Iqbal Day. I said, if you like Iqbal, you should follow his advice not to imitate, including Iqbal himself.
Yeah.
You should have
Did they like it?
creativity. They invited me again. I thought that was a persona non grata.
Yes.
But they invited me the next year. I didn't accept it, didn't go. But anyway, we need actually ijtihad in the deepest sense that everybody talks about. But ijtihad not from the point of view of inferiority complex vis-a-vis the West.
Yes.
Always feeling weaker and trying to just emulate them. No, be yourself. You should be strong enough to have your own identity. We have one of the great civilizations the world has produced. Now, yes, it's weakened, has not died out, otherwise we wouldn't be here talking about it. It's weakened. We need to strengthen it, and we need to apply its principles to the new situation that it faces.
Yes. A renewed scholar, Seyyed Nursi from
Yes.
Turkey, he
Yes.
says, our time is not time of tariqa, it is time of Hakika. So this is a kind of criticism of the Tasawwuf Sufism. Do you agree?
Not at all. Absolutely not. Because there is no way to reach the Hakika without the tariqah. Remember, you had this three-stage
Yes.
hierarchy: al-Sharia, al-Tariqa, al-Haqiqa.
Yes.
And in Persian, in Turkish, and Arabic, it was all over the Islamic world. It was very, very important, central. The Sharia is requirement in order to follow the Tariqa. But the Tariqa is also a requirement before reaching the Haqiqa.
I see.
Haqiqa in the absolute sense. Otherwise, the Haqiqa, that water is wet, of course, you don't need the Sharia or Tariqa. But I mean Haqiqa in the sense that the truth has to do with God.
Yes.
God is al-Haq.
Yes,
God
of
is al-Haq. On the level of the Sharia, the reflection actually of God, of course, that's why good Muslims go to heaven if they follow Islam. But Tariqa is a way of reaching God. That's why it's
Yes.
a path, a Tariqa Allah.
Yes.
And God is al-Haqiqa.
Yes.
And so Seyyed Nursi wants to reach God without the road. I
Yes.
do not agree with it.
But it is what he means. Actually, in the modern time, tariqa is a personal spiritual development.
Absolutely not.
It is a personal spiritual. It doesn't offer an alternative to the common problems, doesn't offer a system, for instance, for the modernity. Doesn't offer a system for the modernity. It is just the personal spiritual development. People develop themselves, but they cannot say something about the modernity.
No, well, that's
Except
not true.
you.
I mean, no, the other people, the books of Martin Lings, of Friedrich Schwann, these are all Sufis. Look at what they've written. Guénon himself was a member of the Shadiliya order. All his life he lived as a Sufi. And also, for example, in Iran, there are certain Sufis who do not know the West, so they don't write anything about it. But those who do, there have been some very important works written by Sufis in the criticism of the modern world. I've been placed in a special situation by the hands of destiny, where I was able to know both Islamic tradition and the West well on the highest level, and given the gifts by God to be able to criticize the West on that level. But there are others who are very important critics, and without criticism of the West, we cannot reestablish the authenticity and power of Islam.
That's very important.
Yes,
Sir.
yes.
Without criticism of the West. So what is the way to? What is the method? What would be the method to criticize?
Look at my book, Islam and the Proletarian Modern Man. That is to accept as the truth our own tradition, and to look upon the West from that point of view, rather than upon looking at ourselves from the point of view of the West, which most modern Muslim thinkers do.
Yes, that is the main problem.
Yes, that's the main problem.
That is the main problem. My last question, sir.
All right.
It is about, again, traditional school. I see traditional school is an alternative, probably only alternative in general for the modern culture, mentality, education. And this is so unique why it is so unique is the second, why this side of this dimension of traditional school is not so much discovered and applied.
The first question is that the establishment of the traditional school was really providential. It's by God's grace.
I see.
It gets a way that was opened up as an alternative so that people would understand the errors of the West. When Guénon wrote The Cross of the Modern World, or East and West, it's almost like a revelation to, as a young man when I read it in college, that how to see the West from the point of view of tradition. And it was never meant for everybody. It was meant for few intellectuals who then themselves would influence a larger crowd. And it's not that that's not been effective. It's been very effective, but it has not become popularized among everyone.
I see.
And there are people like Houston Smith, for example, who was a traditionalist, who was a member of Tariqa, who was a Muslim, he worked with me, and whose writings are very popular.
Yes.
The book, The Religion of Man, has sold more than any book in the English language on religion. And over 2 million copies were sold while he was alive. 2 million. It was already a bestseller. And there are some. And my own writings are everywhere, on internet now, and so on and so on. The writings I've heard of Schuon are very difficult, and so they're not meant for everybody.
I see.
But they're like the source of water on top of the mountain. Not everybody can get there. But it percolates down to a fall and makes streams that then everybody can benefit from. And so I think that these traditional works are succeeding a great deal, much more than you think. I mean, look at your own country.
Yes.
I don't know about the others, but you know my books in Turkish. How many? Some of them. I've gone into several printings. They've been for 40 years. How many thousands of copies have been published? And a lot of the Turkish intelligentsia has read it. Not only the strictly traditionalists or even devout Muslims, people who might not be practicing Islam, but whose worldview at least has changed. And the modern world is such that on the one hand, modernism is trying to destroy everything that is not modern, because modernism is absolutist.
I see.
It claims that the old religions were absolutist. Modernism is much more absolutist than any religion in the world.
I see.
It's absolutist. It's only modernism or nothing.
Yes.
In an absolute sense.
Yes.
On the one hand, modernism is spreading. On the other hand, because it's broken inside,
I see.
other things are coming in.
I see.
And it's that other project, other process that involves tradition at its heart.
I see.
I have one student in Malaysia who is one of the great writers in Malaysia, who gives classes every week on perennial philosophy. Over 400 people come to it.
Excellent.
Including some ministers of the cabinet. Very high people.
That's very impressive.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. And we have things like that. Of course, even within the Islamic world, there are governments that are not happy about this.
Yes.
Okay, why am I in exile sitting here? Why are you in exile sitting here? That's true. But despite all of that, ideas not travel. Even if you and I are not here, you write something and 10 minutes later it'll be all over Turkey.
Yes.
Yes. So I have a lot of hope, and I'm very glad that you're here and doing good work.
Thank you.
And I'm very glad to spend these few minutes with you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.